All right, thank you, Emily, and thank you, Gail, of course, for being on and helping to bring our Wild Wednesday member virtual chats to all of you amazing members. Thank you, guys. Hopefully, you guys are doing well, having a wonderful morning. It's getting cool out there, so finally, we're opening the door in the morning, and we're feeling some cool breeze. So hopefully, you guys are out there enjoying that. For those of you guys that have been on our Wild Wednesdays before, welcome back. If anybody is new to our Wild Wednesdays, hello, and thank you for joining us. Today we have gone inside our Conservation Learning Center to say hi to our only amphibian that we have here at the Reid Park Zoo. And of course, that is our poison dart frog. So we also have Katie, who is going to be joining us in just a moment. Katie is our keeper, our lead keeper that takes care of this area, and she knows everything there is to know about poison dart frogs, which is such a cool species. This species, of course, is from Central America and South America, so they kind of range, and they're definitely in that tropical area. So let's bring on Katie. Katie, your mic's on, so do a little mic test here.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Emily, can we hear Katie? Emily,
yes, I can hear Katie.
Yes, all right, there we go. I know we had some audio issues last week, so I apologize about that. Hopefully we're back and you guys can hear and see us, and everything is going to be just great for today. So Katie, thank you for joining us today. I know she was running around taking care of all of her animals, and I called her like 3 minutes before. I'm like, Katie, are you coming? She's like, I got to feed the birds in the bird run. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's important. Give them breakfast, and then come and join us. So Katie, we are in front of our poison dart frog habitat here in our Conservation Learning Center. Hopefully you guys have all had a chance to come and see this amazing habitat, because there is a lot going on. Now we have two different sections here, and we have different species. So why don't you first talk about the different species that we have here, and why do we have them separated?
Yes, so we do, wow, this is beautiful and kind of looks seamless here. We do have two separate tanks. And that's just basically because we have some arboreal species and some ground-dwelling species, and we want to make sure there's no territorial conflicts. So we have on this side of the tank, we have our bumblebee dart frogs, which are these beautiful yellow and black frogs.
And
here.
I'm gonna get the camera up here, so you guys hang on while Katie's trying to talk about this. We're gonna try and find some frogs.
There we go. So front and center right there is our little bumblebee frog. Hopefully you guys can get a chance to see him. He is, just right there, right in the middle. So these guys are obviously called bumblebee frogs because they are yellow and black. And they share this tank with an arboreal species who's a little bit shyer. He's one of the ones that you have to pay really close attention, play a little bit of I Spy to kind of find, and those are called the blessed dart frogs.
The blessed. So what color are the blessed dart frogs?
So the blessed dart frogs are red and blue, and they are about the size of a thumbnail. They're kind of known as thumbnail frogs. So they're really great at hiding and camouflaging themselves in and amongst the foliage we have up on the top part of our habitat. So if you're ever here at the zoo and trying to find our dart frogs, that's kind of the best place to peek at them.
Okay, so the bumblebee and the blessed are on this side. Now you said one is more arboreal, which means that they like to be kind of higher up in the foliage and like to climb a little bit more. Is that the blessed? Are they more arboreal or?
Yes, so the blesseds are going to be our arboreal frogs who live in and amongst the foliage at the top. So we have things called bromeliads, which are kind of a species of plant you would find living in the trees down in their native habitats. And so they'll actually be spending a lot of their time in and amongst those bromeliads to try and hide out.
Okay, so we have our bumblebees and our blessed on this side. And then what about over to our other habitats?
On this other side of our habitat, we have what are called the golden dart frogs. Now, these are really cool frogs because they're actually one of the most toxic species in the world, but not here at the zoo. So here at the zoo, we actually feed out wingless fruit flies, and those are non-toxic.
Okay, so let's talk about poison dart frogs. They get their name because in their native habitat, from the food that they eat, they can turn that into an excretion, which has a toxicity to that. And if a predator tries to grab a hold of, let's say, the golden dart frog, they can get extremely sick from doing that. And so it's an amazing defense mechanism. Now, why don't our frogs here have that same toxicity.
Yeah, well, and it does, just like you said, all come down to the food. So in the wild, they'd be eating a variety of different little invertebrates that would be allowing them to produce that toxin. But here at the zoo, they get fed primarily wingless fruit flies along with some other little invertebrates, some little bugs. And that is actually why they are non-toxic, because they don't have all of those native species that would be allowing them to produce that toxin.
So we have our golden dart frog in here. Is there anybody else in here?
Yes, so we have our Ufaga frogs. So these Ufaga frogs are commonly known as strawberry dart frogs, but here at our zoo, and they're once again that arboreal species. So up in the top, on that far right of the habitat.
Okay, I see.
Crawling around.
I see a green.
Yep.
Right up here. Okay, there we go. We got him.
So yeah, so here at the zoo, we call them unripe strawberry frogs because they're a different morph. So morphs basically can be found in most of the animal kingdom. A common one that people know are albino, and it basically just means it's a different color pattern. So these guys, while they're called strawberry dart frogs and would be a red color found in some of their species, these guys are actually this kind of green color that really blends in well with our foliage in the back top. So we usually call them Ufaga frogs, and that's because they have a really cool adaptation. So Ufaga means egg eater in Latin. And basically that's just because these are one of the few frogs that actually have parental care. These guys are amazing parents and actually will go and lay unfertilized eggs for their tadpoles to eat and help them kind of thrive in kind of a tough environment.
What an awesome adaptation. I know I want to get to that in a little bit and let you guys know, because we do have some special other frog guests that we want to get to. But before we get to that, do we have any other? Those are our 4 species. Okay, so those are our 4 species that we have here at the zoo. Let's talk about coloration and camouflage. Most animals use camouflage to hide. We want to hide because we don't want to be seen. If we're a predator stalking a prey, we use our camouflage to get as close as we can to that prey so they can't see us. And if we're a prey avoiding predation, we want to use camouflage to get away from that predator. Frogs, poison dart frogs, are, for the majority of them, just the opposite. Their coloration tells us what?
So it's called, the scientific phrase for it is called aposomatic coloration. And that just basically means warning colors. So looking at our golden dart frog here is a perfect example. Being one of the most toxic species of dart frogs, they want to let predators know that from the very get-go. They don't want to have predators try to eat them to find that out. So they basically go and have these bright fluorescent colors that stand out really well against their habitat. And that's the first step for predators saying, oh, okay, I might have encountered something that made me feel really sick before that had the same color. And believe it or not, we use it as humans too. If you think about all of our signs that say stop, slow down, they're these bright yellow, red colors. They really stand out and make you pay attention. And so that's one of the best things about these dart frogs is they can be really easy to see in our habitats because they do stand out.
So that toxicity is a warning call for everybody else out there saying, don't mess with me, leave me alone. And we do have some animals that will actually mimic coloration, that they themselves don't have that toxicity, but that we may mimic the same coloration of another animal that does that. We see that in some of our venomous snakes with our king snake and our coral snake. And so the animal kingdom is amazing in how they've created adaptations to be able to either hide or stand out and warn everybody, or be able to mimic another animal, even though they don't have that toxicity. So just amazing stuff that we're seeing, and we see a lot of that in our frogs. Now let's talk about how do they get their name. The poison dart frog, now I guess they kind of look like a little bit of a dart with a pointy head, but that's not actually how they got the name. So how does the poison dart frogs get their name?
Yeah, so poison dart frogs actually get their name because of how humans interacted with them. So in their native range, there are indigenous species that would actually use these to help them hunt. Since their toxin is so potent, it can actually help them take down really large prey. So basically what they would do is they would be able to catch these frogs. They would use some sort of process to kind of get that toxin extra potent. Some of them would kind of roast a frog a little bit. And then they would dip blow darts into the skin of the frog and create kind of these poison darts that would allow them to take down larger prey than they would normally be able to.
Pretty amazing stuff. Now, not all the poison dart frogs have that high toxicity. As you said, the golden dart frog has one of the highest. So there's only about 4 different species that our indigenous people were using for this reason. And now we don't see that quite as often. We actually do see them using a type of plant that has that same excretion, that same toxicity. So I'm sure some places or some areas, some villages are probably still using poison dart frogs for that purpose. But that's how they got the name as the blow dart from the indigenous people that they were using. So we have a bunch of different species of poison dart frogs. As we said, we have 4 of them here. Now, we are talking about frogs and amphibians. There's a difference between a frog and a toad. Talk to us a little bit about what the difference between a frog and a toad are.
Yeah, so frogs and toads can look really similar at first glance. One of the biggest differences, though, is a lot of times frogs are going to be found in very, very damp places. They are very reliant on having high humidity. Toads, we actually have a variety of species of frogs and toads here in the Sonoran Desert, but most of the ones you're going to see hopping around are going to be toads. They're going to be able to stay on land a little bit more frequently, and are also going to have some different skin adaptations. Most of the time when you are looking at them and trying to decipher whether or not you have a frog or a toad in front of you, looking at their skin, the toad's skin is going to be a little bit more bumpy. It's going to appear a little more dry. If you look at our frog skin here, he is almost glistening with all of that moisture around him. And so the frog skin is going to be a lot more smooth and a lot more wet looking.
And I like how you said that the toads are hopping. A lot of times frogs more do a leap or a jump, where toads will crawl or they will hop. Size is a little bit too, so most of our toads are much larger. They have a bigger body to them. The frogs, as we're seeing here, they have a smaller head and a more narrow body than what our toads are. So although they are both amphibians, frogs and toads are very different and do require a different environment to be able to thrive. As you said, frogs need to be near a water source. They need to maintain that dampness on their skin, where toads can sustain longer without going into a water, but both need water to be able to lay their eggs. Now, frogs and toads will lay their eggs differently, as you were saying. For these guys, most of the time frogs will lay their eggs in clumps, where toads will have this string of eggs that are going out. And we have had some eggs laid here, and we have had frogs that have metamorphosized and from their egg to the tadpole and then to an adult frog. So talk to us a little bit about our species and how that works, because I think it's really interesting. You were telling me the story of at least one of them on how they carry that tadpole up to the Bromeliad pad.
Yeah, so it's been actually the most fun fact that I've learned about actually the frog you're seeing right now, these Ufaga frogs. So basically what they'll do is they'll lay their eggs somewhere in the habitat. Sometimes we'll see them on leaves or down on the ground, and they'll kind of be in this clump in this nice moist area. Now those frogs will hatch out into tadpoles, and tadpoles obviously need water to be able to swim around, survive, find their food. So these parent frogs will actually go and scoop up those tadpoles, put one at a time on their back, and then hop up to these bromeliads. So what the frog is sitting on right now is called a bromeliad plant. So that's what they kind of look like. And in the center of these plants, especially in the wild, would be little small pools of water. Now these would be teeming with a variety of different species that they would be eating out in the wild. So tiny little microfauna, tiny little bugs, and then also species of plant like algae that these tadpoles would be eating. But here in our tank, we don't kind of have that quite variety of species. And so one of the coolest things about these Ufaga frogs is they actually will go and lay unfertilized eggs. So basically just kind of eggs that won't ever hatch into tadpoles. And they'll lay those in there for the tadpoles to eat. So that's given the tadpoles from this species an opportunity to actually grow up and metamorphosize right here at the zoo. So it's always a fun day when we can come in and we've seen them maybe carry the tadpoles in. We think there's a tadpole in some of these bromeliads, and we can actually see them hop out of those bromeliads after their first metamorphosis. Some of them still have had a little bit of a tail, and then kind of watch them grow up here in the tank. Once we do see those smaller frogs, we will give out some other types of food that are good for smaller frogs called springtails. Are basically tiny little microinvertebrates that live in the leaf litter. The baby frogs tend to be a lot.
Jed and Katie, can you hear me? I think your sound cut out.
Yeah, Jad, you did cut out on your sound, so.
Check. Testing, testing, testing.
There you
Can you hear
go.
us now? Okay. Sorry, guys. We've got these new mic packs, and I just put in brand new batteries before we started this, and within 30 minutes, it burned through. So I really got to check and see on our batteries, like what's going on with them and why they're burning through so quickly. But I did bring up backup batteries just for this reason. So sorry about that little interruption there. We didn't miss too much. So Katie was telling us about how the Ufaga frog is going to bring their little babies. Oh, did we lose him? Oh, he's still down in there. Okay. So Katie, we do have some of those babies here that are, well, they're kind of full frogs at this point. So I'm going to back this up and I'm going to show you guys some of those frogs that we have actually hatched here. Now, they're not in the habitat because, you know, we need to be responsible about how many frogs we have in a specific space. We don't want too many in one space. And so do we have any, hang on, we're looking at our little aquarium here. We have them. I'm gonna kind of put this over on Katie in a moment. She's looking to see if she can see any that are inside here. So as Katie was saying, once we see them kind of hopping around and they are, you know, turning into more of a larger species or larger frog, we will remove them from the initial habitat. And then we have other zoos that are interested in poison dart frogs. And we are able, oh, I see you right there. Hang on, guys. Okay, so what species is this down in here?
So this is the Euphogus. So this is the
perfect.
offspring of that frog we just saw.
Trying to focus for you guys.
This little guy, we have been calling Massimo because when he was little, he was hanging out in the moss in the front of the habitat for most of his kind of juvenile life. And so we pulled them into here. Basically, we want to make sure that we don't have too much competition for food in our tanks. They're kind of set up for a set amount of frogs. And then we also want to make sure that we don't have breeding between moms and dads and then their offspring. So those are the two most important reasons why we pull them out. And we're also to be able to give them a little bit more specialized care. We can pay a little bit more attention to them when they're in these smaller containers and make sure they're growing properly and getting enough food.
Yeah, because we could definitely tell if that little tiny guy was in our larger habitat, especially with his coloration. He would be very challenging to be able to see and make sure that he's doing okay. So, and then we work with other zoos that are interested in poison dart frogs, and we're able to transport these guys to those other facilities so that they can use these amazing ambassadors to teach about what's going on in their native habitat. So let's talk a little bit about their native habitat. As we said, our dart frogs are from Central South America, and they do live in the rainforest. And Katie, frogs are known as an indicator species. So what is an indicator species, and why are they important to their habitat?
Yeah, so indicator species are basically a species that mostly scientists, but even the common man can use to help assess the health of a habitat. So frogs in particular make really great indicator species in a variety of habitats. And actually, I'm going to interrupt because a blessed frog just came down on the ground.
Oh, tell show me
right,
where.
right in the middle back behind the kind of bromeliad
Oh,
plant.
I do see one. All right, guys, hang on. So you keep talking about indicator species.
Yep.
I'm going to try to find our blessed for you guys.
So indicator species really help assess the health of a habitat. And frogs are really great at that because they have what's called a porous skin. Their skin actually acts like a sponge and is able to absorb water and nutrients from their environment, which is good for the frogs. But unfortunately, when we put humans into the mix, that can actually mean that they absorb things that they're not supposed to, pollutants, or even just an excess of nutrients into their bodies. And so frogs are some of the first species to be impacted if we do have something going wrong in an environment. Beyond just being absorbing things into their skin, they're also very reliant on insect species and also plant species that can be a little bit harder for scientists to study. They're harder to find, they're harder to see, they're harder to assess how many are in an area. And so frogs, if they are having an issue, scientists know there is something wrong with the greater habitat. So that's one of the things that scientists can look at to say, okay, this is a healthy habitat. We have lots of amphibians, lots of frogs hopping around. That means they have food, it means they have shelter, and it means they have a healthy environment. And so it's something we can use even here in the desert to kind of say, all right, we're doing a good job about protecting our native habitat here.
So if there is something, frogs would be the first to indicate that there's an issue. So if we start seeing a die-off on frogs, it is an opportunity for us to go in and say what's going on, and how can we potentially change this. Now, amphibians, as you said, they can breathe through their skin and they can absorb nutrients through their skin, and we can use that to our advantage when we are medicating a frog.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So here at the zoo, we go, and frogs also just happen to carry a lot of parasites. They can just be natural hosts for them. They live around water sources that have kind of these parasites floating around. So here at the zoo, believe it or not, we give veterinary checks to all of our animals, from the biggest elephant to the smallest dart frog. So about every 6 months, our vet comes in and we'll actually go and take all of our frogs out of the habitat and give them a full vet physical, just like we would do with our pets. They kind of check out from nose to toes, all of their body parts to make sure they're nice and healthy. And then we'll also kind of assess if they have any parasites. And then we can actually treat for those. So since frogs absorb things through their skin, we're actually just able to put a tiny drop of medication on the top of their back, and that will absorb in to help them fight off any of those parasites that might be present.
What an amazing way to be able to care for an amphibian. It's very non-invasive. You don't have to do an injection. You don't have to try to medicate their food like we will with some of our other species. These guys drop a medication on their back, or even in a medicated bath that they can sit in. They're able to absorb that medication and allow that treatment to take success. We've been talking a little bit about food with these guys, and that we feed something different here at the zoo than what they would find in the wild, which is again why these frogs do not have the same toxicity or that poison that our wild native frogs would have. So what are we feeding these guys, and can we feed them?
Yeah, so we definitely can. You can see everybody is hopping all around saying it is time for breakfast. So what we're going to be feeding them today are those wingless fruit flies we talked about before. While they're called wingless fruit flies, they do have wings, but don't have the ability to fly. So they kind of hop around on the same level as our frogs. And that gives us the opportunity to feed out these flies to them and not have them fly all around the habitat, which would make it hard for us to clean in there. So we actually go and feed them about once a day here at the zoo. And then we also kind of dust them with some vitamins. So when we put the flies in there, you'll actually see they're a little bit white. So hopefully it can stand out a little bit so you guys can get a chance to see. And then one of the things we do here at the zoo is actually kind of let our frogs know it's feeding time. So we're going to mist down the habitat first.
Okay.
And that's basically a cue for the frogs to say, okay, the misting is coming, that means that breakfast is following soon after.
All right, let's do it. Let's get it. Let's see what our frogs are going to do. I'm just going to back this up to allow Katie to get in here right in front of us. And once she gets in here, I'm going to try to get around her to try to get you guys the best spot, the best look at what's going on. So we do have automatic misters that are going on throughout the day. They're timed misters. This is a very elaborate habitat setup, but you do some extra misting throughout the day as well.
Yes, so humidity is the maybe number one thing we have to really worry about with our dart frogs. We have an excellent habitat that does have that automatic mister system and is really set up specifically for these dart frogs to keep kind of that nice rainforest going in there. We obviously live in the desert and so need to kind of be making sure we're keeping our habitat nice and moist throughout the day. So we also use our automatic misting system as well as our hand misting to make sure that we're not missing any small areas for our frogs as well. This is a hand mister, so the sound you're hearing is probably me pumping it up, if you guys can hear that over there.
We're pumping up our air pressure to get some water going. And this is a good indicator again for the frogs that we've got some food coming. Now, as we're doing this, Katie, poison dart frogs can be part of a home pet and a hobbyist. I definitely see a lot of sales for poison dart frogs out there. This is not a species that a novice should really go, an amateur should really go and pick up. I mean, this is a species that's very challenging to be able to house, and one that if somebody does want to get for their home, they need to do quite a bit of research and have a pretty good setup for them.
Yes, so dart frogs, while amazing, are definitely something that, especially here at the zoo, we always encourage with any pet for people to do their research, but particularly for dart frogs, you need to know exactly what you're doing before you get them. Their habitat setup, as you can see, is pretty
it's elaborate.
Yes, it's very elaborate. And we have a kind of what's called a bioactive habitat here where we can grow plants, we can have insects living in the soil, and that helps provide frogs kind of the best home. You also have to see as we're going, we're going to
okay, so food's going in.
Sprinkle some fruit flies in here. Have to be able to go and feed your pets some live food and then make sure you're keeping up with those colonies. Here at the zoo, we actually grow our own fruit flies, and that allows us to make sure we have kind of the healthiest food source and a consistent food source for them here at the zoo. So it definitely is not something that you can just go out and say, hey, I want some dart frogs. I'm going to go to the pet store and pick some up. This is going to be several months worth of research. And then we always recommend that you kind of do an assessment. Is this the right pet for your house? If you want something that is pretty hands-off in terms of you can't snuggle them, you can't cuddle them, they need to stay in their habitat space. And they do require a lot of care throughout the day. You do need to make sure you're keeping up with humidity levels and that you're able to kind of go and do those physical assessments on your frogs. You still need to be able to provide them vet care and find a vet that knows what they're doing about dart frogs. So there are a lot of aspects of their care that are not really the best for a starter pet, but could be something that if you really love dart frogs and put in a lot of time and effort, could be a very amazing animal.
Yeah, so for any of you guys out there that are interested in having any amphibian in your house, please do the research first. Just like Katie said, make sure that this is the right pet for you and that you have all of the setup you need for that animal to be successful. So we see these bumblebee frogs, man, they are going after these flies. I love it. I'm hoping you guys can see their little tongue sticking out and grabbing. We've got a little reflection just because of the lights here, but hopefully you can see those little tongue going and grabbing all the little fruit flies. So how many of the blesseds do we have in here?
So there are 2 blessed frogs.
Okay, so we saw one of them.
We saw the one. And it's pretty amazing. So here at the zoo, we do go and are able to tell these dart frogs apart. So as you're looking at these, the bumblebees are one of the best ones that we like to show off.
I see the 2 spots right on the back. Is that an indication of which one this is?
Exactly. Just like we have different fingerprints as humans, frogs all have different back patterns. So we can zoom in on the other guy. We call that guy Stripe.
Stripe.
We're
Yep,
very creative
okay.
with our names.
Yeah.
Stripe and Double Dot
So he's
are in
got
the
2
front.
stripes there. Hopefully you guys can see that. And then this guy here, let me find him. Yep, he's got 2 dots right on his back. So
And actually, as we're zoomed in there, if you guys can see, the back toes on this frog are tapping. And this is one of those cool behaviors that I'm hoping there are some aspiring scientists out there, some younger kids who are interested in animals and maybe want to do some research with them. Because one of the cool things is we never know 100% about any animal. And one of the things scientists aren't quite sure about is this toe tapping behavior.
So I don't know if you guys saw that. She's talking about one of the rear toes. See the toes tapping? The little toes tapping on the ground, and we don't know what that is.
Yeah, so we have some good guesses.
Ooh, we see another guy coming out in the back here.
Yep, so, and then
Another bumblebee.
you guys, if you watch the back patterns and even the face of this one, we call this one multi-dot. And so if you guys take a look at her, we also call her the queen bee because she is our female dart frog.
Ah, I love it. Now, are they sexually dimorphic? Can you tell the difference between males and females just by looking at them?
So there is a slight sexual dimorphism in that their toe pads are going to look a little bit different, but it's not 100%. Most of the time here at the zoo, the way we're able to assess whether it's a male or a female is based on behavior. So we do see mating behaviors between these frogs here, and then especially with the Euphagas can actually see some differences in how they take care of their eggs.
Such amazing animals. Yeah, this one seems like he was hanging out. Now, these guys are diurnal, so they are coming out during the daytime, and then they kind of hunker down at night. And again, remember their coloration. They want animals to see them. So that's why these guys are going to be out during the daytime and then hide from potential predators at nighttime. So with this, Emily and Gail, do we have any questions that Katie or I can answer?
Yeah, we have a couple of questions. The first one is, do frogs ever blink?
I don't think frogs have eyelids. Good question, Katie. I don't know the answer to that.
So frogs will go and are able to kind of close their eyes sometimes,
Okay.
but most of the time it's kind of they sink back into their heads. I'm not sure if it's considered eyelids,
Blink? Yeah.
but they will go and shut their eyes, and a lot of times it's related to swallowing. When we see one of, especially our Goldens do it a lot, when they have a big meal, they'll kind of go and sink their eyes back as they're swallowing.
Because I know some frogs will use their tongue to kind of lick their eyeballs, and that helps to moisturize the eyeballs. So I don't know if they have a blinking mechanism like we do. That blinking mechanism in mammals does help to keep and maintain moisture. So yeah, I'm not sure if it does the same thing in a frog or not.
Good question. One to do some research on after we get off the air.
So do you want to feed our, do these guys get some missing and feeding over here? We're going to try to do our golden dart frogs. And Emily, you're welcome to ask another question here if we have any more while we're doing this.
What types of parasites do they commonly get?
So there's a common parasite called strongyloides. And it's kind of one of the most common parasites out there in the world. And that is one that we have seen in frogs before. And so something that we're pretty aware of to keep tabs on when we're looking for those parasite infections.
And do they do well with treatment? So once we see that, we're able to give them whatever the anti-parasitic is, and they seem to clear up pretty good?
Yes, and that's one of the most important things that we found here at the zoo. So a lot of times, frogs will have parasites, but it can be negative for their health. And so it is something that we have chosen here at the zoo that we find it's really important to be able to give that, we call it prophylactic care, but basically just preventative care to make sure that it doesn't harm them long term. It's a pretty uninvasive thing for them. And so we are able to collect a fecal sample, so just a little poop sample from them, assess if they have parasites, and then be able to just administer that medication.
Who knew there was so much to think about with poison dart frogs? I love it.
That is really interesting. Thank you, Katie. That was a great answer. We have one more question so far. If there is a power outage, since this is such an elaborate habitat, what would happen? Do we have sort of a backup system?
So obviously we do have our Mister system that we can do on backups. A lot of the other things are related to lighting. And then we'd also want to make sure we're paying attention to our heat sources. So we can definitely obviously put out some different types of lights for them, and then also make sure that we are maintaining the right temperatures inside. We do have thermometers that are active on our top parts of our habitat, so we can kind of assess that as we go, and then would be able to put out any sort of heat lamps and things that they would need.
Yeah, this isn't a huge system, and so it doesn't really require an emergency backup generator. It's something that if we did have a power outage, we would know that pretty quickly and be able to come over and provide any sort of supplemental heat, moisture, humidity that our frogs would need. And it's not one that, you know, they can sustain some different variances in their temperature. So it's not like if we rose or dropped a couple degrees, we would see, you know, an immediate effect, but we would want to make sure that we get over here as soon as we can to give them a hand. So it looks like we just gave some food to our golden dart frog here.
Our mom, Ufaga, is hiding under that leaf on that bromeliad. She just hopped out from the bromeliad there.
Okay. All right, Katie or Emily, do we have any other questions at the moment?
We have one other question, not really related to the dart frogs necessarily, but since we saw sort of so little rain this last monsoon season, did we notice any difference with the animals kind of having less rain to experience around the zoo?
Yeah, there's no doubt that the rainfall will affect our amphibians. We have some tree frogs that are native here, and then the Colorado river toad, which is fairly famous for some of its toxicity. And the Colorado river toad will use the monsoons as an opportunity to come out and mingle with other toads for mating. And with the decrease in our water sources, there was reports of a decrease in our frogs. The tree frog numbers were down this year, and there's no doubt that sometimes it might take a season for us to actually see the effects of that rainfall. So there's a chance that next year we may not have quite as many toads and frogs out in the Sonoran Desert. So that's one major thing with these animals. And again, talking about an indicator species, that if there is any sort of toxicities in their environment, we can see that, but they're very susceptible to changes in their environment. The dart frogs are listed as threatened, and Katie, a lot of that is due to their habitats, that it's going away.
Yes. So between prolonged drought, which we're seeing throughout South America, those fires that we are continuing to see down in South America, but we particularly at the beginning of this year had an extraordinary fire season. And then with that, humans coming in and disrupting habitat, we're seeing a lot of deforestation throughout their native range. So it is something that has caused a lot of issues. A lot of dart frog species are very isolated in terms of they're kind of in a very specific locale and don't move far outside of that. So the effects of drought, the effects of fires, and the effects of human impacts on their habitat are kind of magnified based on their small locales too. And it looks like our other blessed has come out on top of that bromeliad.
I see. I'm going to try to see. I love the little blesseds. They're like my little Spidermans. That's what I call them. Little Spiderman frogs. So with their habitat, you know, threatened and going away, what can we do? You know, this is a species that needs water, so we can do some obvious things like reduce water. You know, make sure that we're not using it when we don't need it. What are some other things that we can do to help frogs?
Yeah. So obviously, yes, water consumption is a big one, especially here in the desert, making sure we're making the right choices, that we are helping preserve our water resources. Climate change is one of the reasons why we're seeing kind of a lot of this deforestation around the world. So making some good choices for our ecosystem as a whole, driving less, choosing less plastic, trying to work on our energy consumption can be things that you guys can do in your homes to help dart frogs. And then, of course, by being members and attending chats like this, you guys are definitely taking a lot of steps to actually help preserve native habitats for these frogs. By your membership and when you come and visit the zoo, we're able to go and help save wild habitats and wild spaces for animals like the frog. For example, we sponsor the Giant Anteaters and Highway Project here at the zoo. And that actually goes and not only researches giant anteaters and how best to allow them to cross highways, but also allows us to go out and save parts of that habitat. So by coming and supporting your zoo, you also help us go out and kind of put your dollars to work to save habitats all around the world. And then, of course, we have to do our part here in the Sonoran Desert too. So loss of habitat is something that is worldwide, including right here in our neighborhoods. And so one of the things the zoo has done is actually we just planted this brand new pollinator garden. And that's full of native plants and species that will help attract pollinators like the monarch butterfly, a variety of other insects, and even mammals and things like bats to our zoo to help them kind of have a way station so they can continue to help all of our native plants in the Sonoran Desert.
And I want to do a whole episode on our pollinator garden. I think next week we are going to go to our Temple Tiny Monkeys for our squirrel monkeys, but maybe after that we will do a whole virtual member Wild Wednesday chat on our pollinator garden, because I think it is really cool and it's a lot of small things that people can do in their backyard, which is a lot of, which is fun. They are going to help out all of those pollinators, which unfortunately we see pesticides going out there to kill them, but we need to also make sure we're doing our part in giving them spaces to be able to thrive. So don't worry, guys, we're going to do a whole thing on pollinator gardening, because I love that tie-in on things that you can do right at your home, because people always ask, what can I do? What can I do for frogs in South America? I don't live there. I don't go there. I don't travel there. Well, we can make differences right here. Another thing is making sure that you are a smart consumer. What are you purchasing? And what the things that you're purchasing, are those things coming from companies that are using good practices to be able to extract whatever it is, whether it's coffee, whether it's palm oil, whatever those things are. Let's make sure we're doing our part in being smart consumers and getting good products and supporting those companies that are supporting our environment. So with that, Katie, I think we're getting a little bit close to 10 o'clock, and I'll just keep talking forever. You guys know that on me, but I do want to make sure to respect Katie's time and respect all your guys' time. So we're going to bring our camera back out, and we're going to jump back in front of it. Okay, there we go. Hold on. Let me bring this back up. And so, Emily, do we have any kind of last questions for us as we close out here? There we go.
No, I think you guys answered all of them with all the great information you shared. I feel like I could be a dart frog expert now. So thank you so much. Do you have any parting words about frogs or any upcoming events?
Yes, again, we do have a couple spots on our Costuming Critters. That is our Halloween event. So if you are interested in this Thursday, this Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we do have our Halloween event. It is an evening event. You do need to get tickets. There are only a few tickets left. So if you are interested in coming to that, please go online and make sure to look to get those tickets. We also are going to be having a fabulous World Lemur event talk coming up on Friday, October 30th. I will be hosting that event with Dr. Stacy Teacott, who is a conservationist, PhD biologist who has been studying lemurs in Madagascar for the last 20 years. She's right out of the University of Arizona. She has a lab there called LEAP, and we're going to be learning not only what her conservation projects are doing, how those lemurs are doing in the wild, but also we're going to be hearing from Hannah, one of our zookeepers here at the Reid Park Zoo, who cares directly for our lemur species. And so it's going to be a really dynamic conservation chat. So that information is online now. It's free, so make sure you guys sign up for that. And I believe it's at 5:30 p.m. So we definitely want to hear from and see all you guys. It's going to be another great event. So we got those things coming up. And then, of course, next Wednesday, we're probably going to be traveling to South America again for our Temple Tiny Monkeys. So a huge thank you to Katie. Katie, thank you for all the work that you do. Thank you for all the information. hear about our poison dart frogs. I love it. I learn something new about them every time I work with Katie on these. And so she is a wealth of knowledge. So I'm so glad that she was able to take some time out of her day to join us. And thank you to all of you guys as well for everything that you guys do. The members are the heart and soul of this organization. We cannot be doing all these amazing things without you guys. So thank you guys for joining us this morning. Thank you guys for supporting Reid Park Zoo. Make sure you guys come in and say hi to all your favorite animals. And if not, we'll see you next time on our next virtual event. So goodbye from us here at Reid Park Zoo, and